Hi, folks. So, I've been trying to teach myself sound editing for about the last few months. And unfortunately, I haven't been able to commit the time to it that I really should in order to get good. And on top of that, I also don't have several components of hardware that I probably should as well. But despite these limitations, I've had fun making some musical instrumental covers of primarily folk songs. And I'll probably redo those if and when I eventually learn what the hell I'm doing. So, with Christmas less than 2 weeks away at the time of this recording, I wanted to do my own version of some Christmas carol. Now, the obvious choice would be my favorite Christmas carol, I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day, based on an 1863 poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. I did a dramatic reading of that poem last Christmas, and that was back when I had an even cheaper microphone and knew even less about audio editing. And so I'll link to it, but it's probably terrible. If you've never read the original poem, the point of it is that the protagonist has a crisis of faith on Christmas Day induced by the Civil War. This reflected Longfellow's own crisis of faith that was going on at this time. His wife, Fanny, had burned to death in 1861, and his son had a near fatal injury at the Battle of Mine Run just a month before this poem was written. Now, the most common arrangement of this song, composed by Johnny Marks in 1956, omits the verses explicitly referencing the Civil War, but it largely keeps the overall structure intact. But the most inexplicably popular arrangement of this song is a cover by contemporary Christian band Casting Crowns. And pretty much everybody has explored what's wrong with contemporary Christian music. It's deliberately designed to be passionless and inoffensive. And if you want a really good video on that, I recommend this one by Adam Neely about, why it's so bad. But I want to use this particular arrangement of this particular song to illustrate how lifeless contemporary Christian music is. Let's look briefly at the original poem. The whole thing is 7 verses long. We have 3 verses that indicate the sort of the Christmas joyful noise bit, and then 3 verses talking about the Civil War, building to the crisis of faith, and in despair I bowed my head. And then at the very end, we get one last verse that offers hope to the protagonist. But by using the proportion of time spent on having the crisis of faith, 3 verses, and having these 3 verses arguably serve as a recontextualization of the first 3 verses as part of the crisis of faith, giving us 6 verses of crisis of faith, the implication by that proportion is that the final version isn't enough to completely cure that crisis of faith. It is just hope that the crisis of faith will be alleviated by the power of the divine. Now, we can look at the conventional version of this song. So there's a couple of different versions. This one sticks this verse here instead of here, but the same idea, right? The Civil War verses are specifically removed, and so it makes the crisis of faith a generic one. And because we spend less time proportionally dwelling on the crisis of faith, and there's no recontextualization, it serves to marginalize the crisis of faith, and even suggests that it's completely resolved by the end of the song. But these problems are confounded by the Casting Crowns version. This version has 8 verses, only 4 of which are from the original poem, and the crisis of faith verse is the 3rd one this time. And again, there's no recontextualization. So this not only presents the crisis of faith as generic, but the structure of this poem dismisses and even mocks the crisis of faith. Your crisis of faith is groundless, a mild inconvenience, and you're stupid for even doubting God's benevolence. one verse of doubt, followed by being corrected for 5 verses. This is emblematic of contemporary Christian music's general contempt for any real emotional struggle or passion in the life of the believer. I hate this version so much, and I hate how frequently it's covered and how many new arrangements are based on this one. So if I'm going to do my own cover of this song, I want it to be as far from the Casting Crowns version as possible. Obviously, I want to keep all 7 verses, and I want to pick elements that emphasize both the Civil War and really pay proper respect to the crisis of faith. I want my arrangement to tell a story. So I'm picturing Longfellow sitting at a piano, and in his crisis of faith, he imagines Fanny standing before him as an angel, and she's holding a lyre, and she plucks a few notes of the melody, and with that, Longfellow is inspired to play the first verse just being the melody. I heard the bells on Christmas Day their old familiar carols play, and wild and sweet the words repeat of peace on earth, goodwill to men. As Fanny plays on, Longfellow adds some harmony with some major chords to emphasize the hopefulness, and thought as how the day had come, the belfries of all Christendom had rolled along the unbroken song of peace on earth, goodwill to men. And then the momentum keeps building through the 3rd verse, till ringing, singing on its way, the world revolves from night to day, a voice, a chime, a chant sublime of peace on earth, goodwill to men. But just as that momentum should reach its peak on that last line, I want the accompaniment to die, and there should be a moment of questioning, both in the tone of that final note and in the silence afterwards, of peace on earth, goodwill to men, maybe? And the unresolved nature of that should really begin the crisis of faith. And again, the 4th verse, the first of the Civil War verses, should open with just the melody, I'm thinking, and maybe a little bit lower and maybe a little bit slower. Then from each black accursed mouth the cannon thundered in the south, and with that sound the carols drowned of peace on earth, goodwill to men. And I was thinking, at that line, and in that sound the carols drowned, I think I want to add a bugle call playing taps. I want it to create dissonance, and I want it to drown out the carol, and I want it to add emphasis to the specter of death to bring home the precise reason for the crisis of faith. And I'm going to play it through all the Civil War verses, connecting them together. I think for the 5th verse, I want to slow the rhythm down even more, and I want to increase the sense of dissonance by maybe having the timing just be a little bit off. And, maybe we'll start with some major chords, but as Longfellow's hands tremble, uncertain about how to feel, maybe it slips into the minor key just a little bit. It was as if an earthquake rent the hearthstones of a continent and made forlorn those households born of peace on earth, goodwill to men. But by the 5th verse, Longfellow has settled on harmonizing those minor chords, and in fact the melody is played in a minor key. And in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said, for hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men. At this point, his emotions are so extreme on the last line that his accompaniment dies and he can't even finish the final notes. He bashes on the keyboards in frustration, sighs, and begins to sob. Then the bells ring in the far faint distance, and an angelic choir slowly begins to sing, slowly reawakening his hope. Finally, as that builds, an upbeat piano version with accompaniment in major plays for the final verse. Then pealed the bells more loud and deep. God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to men. And as that verse finishes on the piano, we're left with the choir again singing the final line in canon, peace on earth, goodwill to men, as we're played out. So here is my version of this song that I've arranged. Well, I know it's not very good, but hopefully I'll have some time to improve my DAW skills over winter break and install some new hardware in my little recording studio. Uh, this is going to be my last scripted video before Christmas as I take a much needed break and turn to finally working on my dissertation proper. I'll see you guys in January. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, folks.